There are certain promises lovers should never make. Promises whispered in the dead of night, spoken in the heat of passion, bound by something far darker than devotion. Daniel and Evelyn were not the kind of couple who dreamed of fairy tale endings. Their love was obsessive, consuming, and above all, dangerous. It was not enough for them to be together. They needed to erase every piece of their past that stood in the way. And so a pact was made. It wasn't spoken carelessly. It was crafted with intent, shaped like a sharpened blade between them. Evelyn would take care of Claire, Daniel's ex, the one who had left him broken, humiliated, and seething with quiet resentment. And Daniel? He would handle Mark, Evelyn's abusive former lover, the man who had left her bruised in ways no one could see. There were no second thoughts, no hesitation. Just an agreement between two lovers who believed, with absolute certainty, that their future could only exist if they severed their past. But even the most carefully made pacts unravel under the weight of doubt. That night, as they sat across from each other in their dimly lit apartment, the terms of their agreement were laid out like a binding contract. The air between them was thick with an unspoken understanding. They wouldn't act out of impulse. No, this required precision. Claire and Mark had to disappear without suspicion, their deaths woven into the ordinary tragedies of life. An accident, a robbery gone wrong, an unfortunate twist of fate. Evelyn sipped her wine slowly, her fingers tracing the rim of the glass. "No loose ends," she murmured. Daniel nodded. "No loose ends." And yet, as they sealed their pact with a kiss, neither of them realized that the first loose end had already formed. The moment they decided to kill for each other, they gave each other a reason to fear. Because once someone is willing to kill for you, how long before they're willing to kill you? Their love was now a loaded gun, and the safety was off. A promise is easy to make in the heat of passion. But the moment the time comes to act, something changes. The air thickens, the weight of reality presses down, and the hands that once trembled with desire begin to shake with something else. Evelyn had never killed before, but she had imagined it, pictured it in perfect detail. Claire, Daniel's ex, had been a shadow looming over their relationship. A woman who had left Daniel humiliated, discarded like something cheap and forgettable. Evelyn had heard the stories, the way Claire had toyed with him, the way she had looked at him like he was nothing. Now, Evelyn would return the favor. For weeks, she had studied Claire's routine. The way she walked home alone after work, the way she always checked her phone but never her surroundings. The way she lived with the careless confidence of someone who had never been hunted. Evelyn watched from a distance, patient, methodical. She waited for the perfect moment, and on a cold, rainy evening, it arrived. Claire's apartment was only a few blocks from the cafe where she worked. She always took the same shortcut, an alleyway, dimly lit, empty at this time of night. A place where screams would be swallowed by the rain. Evelyn's heart pounded as she gripped the handle of the knife in her coat pocket. This was it. No turning back, no second chances. Claire didn't even hear her approach. The first stab was a blur, the second deliberate, the third unnecessary. Claire gasped, eyes wide with shock, struggling to comprehend what was happening. Her hands grasped at Evelyn's coat, at the air, at nothing. And then, she fell. The rain mixed with the blood, washing it away in tiny rivulets that trickled between the cracks in the pavement. Evelyn stood there for a moment, frozen, staring down at what she had done. It was easier than she expected, quieter. No loose ends. She stepped back, her breath steadying. The rain would cover any trace of her presence. The city would forget Claire by morning. A robbery gone wrong. That's how they'd explain it. A tragic, random act of violence. By the time Evelyn walked away, she felt lighter. The pact had been fulfilled. Now it was Daniel's turn. Murder changes people. Evelyn hadn't expected to sleep so well that night. But when she woke the next morning, her body felt weightless, as if a burden had been lifted. The act itself had been simple. Claire was gone, and with her, any trace of Daniel's past. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the rush of guilt to set in. It never came. Instead, she felt powerful. Daniel, on the other hand, was different. He had kissed her that morning, running his fingers through her hair, whispering that he loved her. But there was something in his eyes. Not fear, not even shock, just hesitation. By nightfall, Evelyn began to notice. He was quiet, distracted. His hands trembled slightly when he reached for his coffee. He wasn't himself. That's when she realized Mark was still alive. She didn't ask right away. She told herself he just needed time. But the days passed and Mark remained untouched. No accident, no mysterious disappearance, no body in an alleyway, just silence. At first she was patient. Daniel was careful, meticulous, just like her. Maybe he was waiting for the right moment. Maybe Mark's routine was harder to predict. But patience has a limit. On the fourth night after Claire's death, Evelyn finally spoke. "You haven't done it yet." Daniel looked up from his glass of whiskey, his expression unreadable. "I will. When?" "When the time is right." Evelyn's stomach tightened. The words felt like an excuse, a soft deflection, a hesitation that shouldn't exist. She studied him carefully, searching for something beneath the surface. Fear, regret, guilt, or worse, doubt. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "We made a pact. I know." "Then why is he still alive?" Daniel sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "I just need more time." A cold feeling crept into Evelyn's chest. Time? She hadn't needed more time. She had acted. She had proven her love. And now she was beginning to wonder if she was the only one who had. That night she lay awake, staring at the back of Daniel's head as he slept beside her. And for the first time since their pact, she wondered if she had made a mistake. Doubt is a slow poison. It doesn't kill all at once. It seeps in quietly, unnoticed at first, like a crack in glass, small, harmless. But over time, the crack spreads. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Evelyn saw it now. Daniel still hadn't killed Mark. And no matter what excuse he gave, "I need to be careful. I'm waiting for the right opportunity. It's not as easy as you think." None of it sounded true anymore. Evelyn was patient, but she wasn't stupid. She began to watch Daniel more closely. She noticed how he avoided her gaze when she brought up Mark. How he changed the subject. How his hands fidgeted whenever she pressed too hard. Something wasn't right. One night, when Daniel was in the shower, Evelyn picked up his phone. She knew his passcode. He had nothing to hide, right? Her fingers moved quickly, scrolling through his messages, his call history. Then she saw it. A message from Mark. "Daniel, we need to talk." Her heart pounded in her ears. Daniel had spoken to him. Recently, her stomach twisted as she opened the thread. There weren't many messages, but what she saw made her blood run cold. "Daniel, not now. Can't talk. You're the one who reached out. If you changed your mind, just say it." Evelyn's hands tightened around the phone. Changed his mind? About what? She swallowed, trying to keep her breathing steady. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. Daniel was supposed to kill him. That was the deal. The pact. But instead, he had reached out. Talked to him. What the hell was going on? The sound of the shower stopped. Footsteps on the tile. Evelyn quickly placed the phone back where she found it and slipped into bed, feigning sleep. Daniel walked into the bedroom a moment later, rubbing a towel through his damp hair. He didn't notice the way her breathing had changed. He didn't see the tension in her jaw, the stiffness in her fingers as she gripped the sheets. He had no idea she knew. But now, Evelyn wasn't just doubting him. She was afraid of him. Because if Daniel had changed his mind about Mark, then what else had he changed his mind about? Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that Daniel was hiding something. The text messages, the hesitation, the way he avoided her questions, it all pointed to one thing. He wasn't going to kill Mark. Maybe he never intended to. The thought made her stomach churn. She had kept her end of the pact. She had blood on her hands for him. But Daniel? He was stalling, lying, and worst of all, talking to Mark behind her back. That was betrayal, and betrayal had consequences. But before she could decide what to do about it, the news came. Mark was dead. Evelyn was in the kitchen when she saw the headline flash across her phone screen. Local man found dead in apparent mugging. Her fingers tightened around her coffee cup as she read further. Mark's body had been discovered early that morning in the parking lot outside his apartment complex. Stab wounds, no sign of a struggle, no witnesses, a robbery. That's what the police assumed. Just like Claire, Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't done this, and if she hadn't done it, that only left Daniel, or so she thought. Because when she walked into the living room, Daniel was already on the couch, staring at his phone, pale as a ghost. His fingers hovered over the screen like he had just read the same news. He looked up at her, his expression unreadable. "He's dead." Evelyn's heart pounded. She searched his face for any sign of relief, any hint that he was lying, but all she saw was shock, confusion. She swallowed. You did it?" Daniel's brows furrowed. His voice was quiet. "No." The room seemed to close in around her. No, that wasn't possible. Daniel was lying. He had to be. She had seen the messages. He had been talking to Mark. Maybe he was covering his tracks. Maybe he wanted her to think he didn't do it. But then, a terrifying thought crept into her mind. What if he really hadn't? What if someone else had? Evelyn forced herself to stay calm. Then who did? Daniel shook his head slowly. "I don't know." Silence hung between them, heavy and suffocating. One thing was certain, someone else had killed Mark. And if it wasn't Daniel, then maybe, just maybe, they weren't the only ones keeping secrets. Doubt had already taken root in Evelyn's mind. But now something far worse was spreading. Fear. Mark was dead. But Daniel hadn't killed him. At least, that's what he claimed. Evelyn wanted to believe it was a lie. That Daniel was just covering his tracks. That he was playing some kind of twisted game. But the look in his eyes, the way his hands trembled as he stared at his phone, told her otherwise. He was just as shocked as she was, and that terrified her. Because if neither of them had killed Mark, then someone else had. And that meant someone new. The thought gnawed at her, keeping her awake long after Daniel had gone to bed. She lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing. Everything about their pact had been calculated, controlled. They had agreed to this together. They had set the rules. But now, something had slipped through the cracks. Someone had killed Mark before Daniel could. Was it a coincidence? Or was someone trying to send a message? Evelyn felt her pulse quicken. She needed to be sure. She needed to know if Daniel was lying. She slid out of bed carefully, her bare feet moving silently across the floor. She grabbed Daniel's phone from the nightstand, her fingers moving quickly, unlocking it with ease. The text messages were still there, the ones from Mark. But now, there was something new, a single, unread message from an unknown number. "We need to talk, before she does." Evelyn's blood ran cold. Before she does. She clutched the phone, her breath shallow. Whoever sent that message wasn't talking about her. They were warning Daniel about her. Her hands shook as she placed the phone back where she found it. She climbed back into bed, her mind racing. Daniel was keeping secrets. Maybe he hadn't killed Mark, but he knew something he wasn't telling her. And if he was hiding things from her, then the pact, their bond, their trust, was already broken. For the first time, Evelyn felt it deep in her bones. This wasn't love anymore. This was survival. Evelyn could feel it now, thick, suffocating, curling around her like smoke. The quiet shift between them. The way Daniel's eyes lingered on her just a little too long, as if he was sizing her up, measuring, calculating. He knew. She didn't know how much, but he knew something. And worse, he was afraid of her. The message on his phone had made that clear. Someone had warned him. Someone had told him to act before she did. Before she did what? Evelyn didn't trust him anymore. She couldn't. But she wasn't about to sit back and wait to see what he would do next. She needed to move first. She needed to set a trap. That night, she played her role perfectly. She cooked dinner, laughed at his jokes, ran her fingers through his hair like nothing had changed, like she wasn't secretly watching his every move. And when he finally fell asleep, she got to work. She went to his closet first, searching the pockets of his jackets, the hidden corners where she knew he kept things he didn't want her to find. Nothing. Then, to his desk. She opened the drawers carefully, sifting through old papers, receipts, useless things, until her fingers brushed against something cold. A gun. Her breath caught. She lifted it carefully, her hands steady. It was fully loaded. Daniel had never owned a gun before, at least, not that she knew of. She closed her eyes for a moment, her mind racing. This wasn't a coincidence. He hadn't bought this for protection. He had bought it for her. A sick, twisted feeling coiled in her stomach. The pact had been shattered. The trust between them was gone, and now it was only a matter of who would make the first move. Evelyn placed the gun back exactly where she found it. She wouldn't take it. Daniel would notice. But now she knew. He was planning something, and she would be ready. Evelyn barely slept that night. Every sound, every shift in the bed beside her, sent a jolt of adrenaline through her veins. She knew now. Daniel was planning something. The gun had confirmed it, and yet he still acted normal. Too normal. At breakfast, he poured her coffee like always, kissed her on the cheek, and smiled like a man who wasn't hiding a weapon in his closet, like a man who wasn't waiting for the right moment to use it. Evelyn played along. She laughed at his small talk, pretended she wasn't analyzing every word, every glance. She let him believe she was still in the dark. But she had already decided. She wasn't going to wait for him to make a move. That evening, she set the stage, a bottle of wine, soft candlelight, the illusion of intimacy, carefully crafted. She let him relax, let him sink into comfort, let him think, for just a little while, that everything was still under his control. And then, as he reached for his glass, she struck. "You were going to kill me, weren't you?" The words landed like a hammer. Daniel froze. His fingers tightened around the stem of the glass, but he didn't lift it, didn't drink. His eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time in their relationship, there was no warmth. No love, just calculation. "What are you talking about?" His voice was steady, too steady. Evelyn leaned forward, her heart pounding but her face a mask of cold control. "The gun in your closet." She let the words settle between them, watched his expression carefully. A flicker of something? Surprise? Anger? Then it was gone, buried beneath that carefully constructed calm. He set the glass down. "You went through my things. You were hiding a loaded gun." Silence. The candlelight flickered, casting shadows across his face. Then slowly, he leaned back in his chair, exhaling through his nose. "I wasn't going to kill you," he said finally. "I was preparing in case you tried something first." Evelyn's stomach turned. There it was. The truth laid bare. They weren't lovers anymore. They weren't partners. They were two people trapped in a game where only one would make it out alive. Daniel studied her, his fingers tapping lightly against the table. "But now that I know you've been looking through my things..." He tilted his head slightly. "I have to wonder, should I be afraid of you, Evelyn?" She smiled. "Maybe you should." A confession wasn't enough. Evelyn knew that. Words were just air, and Daniel had always been good at twisting them into whatever he needed them to be. But actions didn't lie. He had a gun. He had been preparing. He had been waiting. And now, so was she. The house felt different that night. The walls thinner, the silence heavier, the air thick with something unspoken. Daniel moved around her carefully, deliberately, like a man who knew he had been caught. And Evelyn, she played along. She let him think she was still unsure, still weighing her options. She let him believe there was still room to fix things. But deep down, she knew the truth. This wouldn't end with an apology. It would end with a body. She just had to make sure it wasn't hers. Daniel went to bed first, stretching, yawning, pretending like sleep would come easy. Evelyn waited. She watched the way his fingers curled under the blanket, the slow, steady rise and fall of his chest. Fake. He wasn't asleep. Neither was she. Minutes passed, then an hour, then 2. The room was silent except for the occasional creak of the house settling. Then, movement. So slight, so careful, but she felt it. The bed shifting. The soft exhale as Daniel turned slightly, toward his side of the closet, toward the gun. Evelyn moved first. In one fluid motion, she was on top of him, pressing her knee into his chest, pinning his arms before he could react. His eyes snapped open, and for the first time she saw it. Real fear. Not suspicion. Not calculation. Fear. "Eve," she pressed a hand to his mouth. "Shh." He struggled, but she had leverage. "This was never about Mark, was it?" she whispered. "It was never about Claire." His eyes flickered, panicked. He shook his head. "Liar." Evelyn leaned closer, lowering her voice until it was barely more than a breath. "It was always about us." His body tensed beneath her. They had never been partners. They had always been predators. And now, only one of them was leaving this bed alive. There was a moment, just a fraction of a second, where Evelyn thought he might surrender. Where Daniel might look her in the eyes and see that it was over. But predators don't surrender. His body jerked beneath her, muscles tensing as he tried to throw her off. But Evelyn was ready. She'd been ready for days. Before he could reach the gun, before he could twist free, she moved. A sharp motion, a gasp. Then stillness. Daniel's eyes widened in shock. His lips parted as if he wanted to speak, but no words came out. His body sagged beneath her, the last bit of fight draining from his limbs. Evelyn sat there for a long time, her own breath heavy, her hands trembling. It was done. She climbed off him slowly, her feet touching the cold floor. The room was silent now. No more pretense, no more games. Just the weight of what had been inevitable from the start. She walked to the closet, reaching for the gun he had been planning to use against her. She wiped her prints from its surface, then carefully placed it in his hand. A tragic end, the authorities would say. A man racked with guilt, unable to live with the weight of what he had done, first his ex, then his own life. A perfect story. Evelyn took one last look at him before stepping into the bathroom. She turned on the shower, let the water wash away the night, and by the time she stepped out, she was someone new. Someone free. She dressed slowly, methodically. No rush, no panic. When she was done, she walked out the door and into the night, the cool air filling her lungs. As if none of it had ever happened. Because that's the thing about murder. If you do it right, no one ever suspects you at all. If you enjoyed this story and want more gripping, suspense-filled content, make sure to subscribe to the channel. There are always more secrets to uncover, more betrayals to unravel, and more thrilling stories just like this one. And remember, trust is just another kind of weapon.